All right. So thank you for coming to this workshop and I'm messing with the mic here. So can everybody hear me pretty well? Okay. All right. Great, 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 great. Um, the topic that we're going to be talking about, and when I say we, it's going to be all of us. I'm going to lead some parts where we're going to have some discussion, and that we'll be able to not only sort of teach and equip each other, but you'll find that much of the stuff some of the people in this room are already practicing. So, a little bit of how we got to this topic and how I'm related to this topic. Um, so, many of you know that I currently serve as superintendent of the River Conference in the Free Methodist Church. Prior to that, I've been on the pastoral staff of several diverse, multi-ethnic, multicultural, socially diverse churches. And so my background was that I came and I was first a minister in a denomination called the United Holy Church, which was predominantly African American holiness denomination. Went to seminary first at Ashland Seminary, which is an Anabaptist and Methodist combined seminary in Ohio. Um, and in that, I was exposed to these weird people called Free Methodists. And our weirdness sort of connected, and the rest is history. That's how I got into the Free Methodist Church. Um, but as my wife and I have planted a church, we planted it with the intentionality of it being a multicultural church. And we did that, and we can tell you a whole bunch of experiences of how it started and what it looked like by the time it was done. Was really, really interesting. And then after being there for 8 years, we were asked to come here to Rochester, where we had the privilege of pastoring New Hope, which is in the city, which was already a multicultural, multi-ethnic, socially diverse church. And then from there, we went back to Cleveland and went with a I should say a non-Free Methodist or United Methodist congregation on the east side of Cleveland. There was a larger but very diverse congregation. Learned quite a bit there, and then from there came to superintendency. I did a Doctor of Ministry program at United Seminary, and my mentor was Mark DeMoss. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with him. Mark is the founder of Mosaics, which is one of the leading um, consultants or movement makers looking at diverse churches. And so my project that I did there was to identify what I called intercultural leadership capacities. Many of you who have been in the multicultural, multi-ethnic ministry for some time know that the year 2000, when Emerson and Smith came out with the book Divided by Faith, one of the conclusions that he made was that many people, particularly those who identified as white, Protestant, and conservative, lacked what he called the toolkit to be able to understand some of the things that African Americans were not only experiencing, but also how they understood things, despite having some very similar theological understandings. And so, part of my research project was to try to identify what are those actual capacities in the infamous toolkit that one needs to have in order to build a diverse uh, community and to keep it together. And so you're going to sort of hear a little bit of that, but even more, you're going to hear more about just sort of the movement of the multicultural, multi-ethnic, socially diverse churches, sort of how they can fall apart, how you can keep them together, and particularly what are leadership capacities that can be learned, that can be adapted, that you need to work on and be intentional about in order to be successful. So, what's really interesting to me is when you heard Dr. Edwards talk about sort of the data on the multi-ethnic church. Um, it can sound a little bit pessimistic. I don't know how many people have read any of her books. How many people have read any of her books? Um, so, so basically, what she has shown and what she said yesterday, if you didn't get a chance to hear her, is that oftentimes the degree in which you have multi-ethnic churches is the degree in which the whites in that congregation are made to feel comfortable. And at the point in which that gets decentered, often you get a very fragile organization. And so the thing that is a bias in her research that she will tell you right up front, in fact, she did say it yesterday, is that she did not talk about multi-ethnic, socially diverse congregations that did not have a significant component of whites. So we've got lots of black churches that are multicultural, right? I was just telling some folks over lunch, we have a Congolese congregation in Abilene, Texas, that has about 250 members now, and it's really interesting because when we first visited there, they do worship in Swahili. So I'm like, okay, this is great. Now everybody's here. They're all worshiping in Swahili. They're all one, and they just had umpteen issues that we end up discussing, and it became clear to us first to learn that there are over 400 different languages spoken in Congo. All right. In that church alone, over 50 different tribal affiliations there, right? And so, we've got the things where there's just some straight up tribal history that they're trying to get people to come in together. And anyway, the history of really multicultural, multi-ethnic, socially diverse churches we often limit to just those that are white and something else, as opposed to understanding there's a whole bunch of other churches. And in fact, there's much to learn from that. Okay, so I'm going to say something controversial to start off with. And this is something that I've seen in Mark DeMaz's books, and as well as things that, particularly if you read Corey Edwards' Elusive Dream, that first book, you'll even get a better idea. And this is this: that if you start off with the intention to build a multi-ethnic, multicultural, socially diverse church, that is your end, you will fail. All right? You're going to fail. All right. So take that controversial statement that I just made, and amongst your tables, explain why you either agree or disagree with that. All right? You got 2 minutes. So, so we know the Great Commandment. What is the Great Commandment? If just using your own words, somebody, come on. All you got. Okay, and there you go. All right, so that's a great commandment, right? Um, Howard Thurman wrote a fantastic sort of breakdown of the story of the Good Samaritan, where he really talks about your neighbor and asking not only who is our neighbor, but really who isn't our neighbor, which is a much deeper thing. And so the great command to love our neighbor is the primary thing that drives us. And so sometimes we're in communities where we get to choose and we have a very homogenous thing, but in most of our urban centers, there may not be people who are ethnically different, but guarantee you there are culturally different people in your neighborhood in which to engage. So when you have the great commandment and you combine it with the great commission, which is to make disciples, uh, we are finding more and more. If you read David Swanson's book on discipling the white church, that many of the things that were racist or racialized were things that were a result of a failure of discipleship. When we begin to teach people everything that Jesus taught us, right, which is this great commandment, then we begin to develop communities of people who have been discipled to love their neighbor. And that's half the issue, that if you radically follow that, then you find that in almost every multi-ethnic, multicultural, socially diverse church, that it started with a call to love our neighbor in radical ways. And so when you keep that focus, then all the other things, all the cultural barriers, all the other things begin to fall. And so when you think about it, in John 13, Jesus basically says, "New command I give you, to love one another as I have loved you. By this, the whole world will know," right? So we should have these communities that are just marked by their love. When's the last time we kicked somebody out of our church for lack of love? I mean, it just isn't a priority sometimes. We sort of say, of course, everybody loves everybody. No, they don't. And then in John 17, he says, "I and them and me." And he says, "I pray that they would be one, so that again, the whole world would know." So there's this really interesting thing about love and unity that comes together, that is to be demonstrated in our communities, that interestingly ends up being multi-ethnic, multicultural, and socially diverse. There's a quote that I think about all the time, and one time I was doing a study on Jonah, and Jonah just doesn't want to deal with the Ninevites. He don't. I'm tired of the Ninevites. They've done horrible stuff, right? And God shows that He cares beyond just the borders of Israel. And in that, there was a quote that basically said that every time that we extend grace beyond a cultural barrier, a completely disruptive movement of God occurs. And that's exactly what we're talking about, trying to extend grace beyond every barrier that our culture tells us, these people are here, these people are there. So I'm going to give you the tale of two cities. Okay. Um, the first one is the city of Rehoboth. How many people have read that story, Genesis 26, in any time recently? All right. So we're going to read this, and then you've got questions that you're going to answer about this. And I'm going to sort of tie it in together. All right. So this is from Genesis 26. It says, "Isaac planted grain in that land, and he reaped 100 sherim that year because the Lord blessed him. Isaac grew richer and richer until he was extremely wealthy. He had livestock, both flocks and cattle, many servants. As a result, the Philistines envied him. The Philistines closed up and filled up with dirt all the wells that his father's servant had dug during his father Abraham's lifetime. Abimelech, which is not the uh, same king Abimelech that Abraham had to deal with, is his son. Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us, because you have become too powerful among us." So Isaac moved away from there, camped in the valley of Gerar, and lived there. Isaac dug out again the wells that were dug during the lifetime of his father Abraham. The Philistines had closed them up after Abraham's death. Isaac gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug wells in the valley and found a well there with fresh water. Isaac's shepherds argued with Gerar's shepherds, each claiming, "This is our water." So Isaac named the well Esek because they quarreled with him. They dug another well and argued about it too. So he named it Sitnah, or means accusation. So it says he left there and he dug another well, but they didn't argue about it. So he named it Rehoboth and said, "Now the Lord has made an open space for us and has made us fertile in the land." Okay, so I want you to think about Isaac's journey to find this place that he names Rehoboth, which literally means broad space or place of prosperity. So he's going through all these different places until he finds a place where he can fulfill his destiny and he can grow crops and he can prosper. For many leaders who are looking for, um, or let me say this differently, for many leaders who are ministering in places that are culturally different than they identify. This story of Rehoboth is a wonderful analogy of sometimes how you feel. That you're never in a place where you feel like you can do well. And there's always other people sort of suggesting that either it's not a good fit here, or somehow we're threatening to you, or somehow there's a scarcity mentality, meaning that if you're doing successful, then we can't be successful. But as you were just listening to that story, um, you know, a common characteristics of what I call an Isaac, right? They have a divine calling on their life, and they're always perceived as threatening. So, um, one of the things that was really interesting is when you put two African American pastors in a multicultural church, um, the literature almost shows all the time it just gets blacker. It just gets blacker with time. Just more black people come. Um, Usually, the whites that are there are pretty steadfast and hanging in there, but as it grows, it gets blacker. And particularly when we were here in Rochester, I remember one person asking me, "Goes, yeah, but do we really want a black church?" And it's not that that person's being sincere. That person had invested in the church, so they had a lot of input of what that church was. The church was multi-ethnic, but they were starting to feel that might change. Um, so I understand they feel sometimes people feel threatened. Uh, they're often misunderstood, misaligned, and perceived as the other, and that's part of what Dr. Edwards talked about. Remember that she was talking about how people feel like you never sort of fit in. Well, here we have Isaac literally just never fitting in. I mean, and people were telling him, right? So the reason I bring up this city is because I find many churches that have a desire to be more diverse really want to be somebody's Rehoboth. They want to be a place where people from all over can come be comfortable, be totally who they are, and to thrive, right? Everybody wants to be the Rehoboth. And so one of the things that I want you to discuss in this 2 minute table talk here is what makes a church safe, what makes a church unsafe for somebody who is culturally distinct. So again, we're talking about not somebody who is already part of the dominant culture, and you can think of culture not just in ethnically, but we're talking about socioeconomically. We can even talk about geographically. Let's just say a person who is not of whatever is the dominant thing in your church. What makes a place a safe place? What makes it so that you can be someone's Rehoboth? All right, 2 minutes. Okay, 3 minutes. That was long. Thank you. All right. Uh, this is a tale of two cities. The first one was Rehoboth. The second one is Corinth. Corinth was reestablished in 44 BCE, and it was a place in which retired army veterans were placed. It was sort of a reward for going there, as well as slaves who were either released by their particular owners or masters in that particular society. And so, what you ended up with is a very cosmopolitan, multi ethnic, multicultural, socially diverse community. And so the Apostle Paul ends up spending 18 months there establishing the church. And he wrote the letter that we know as First Corinthians some 2 years later. And the theme of both of the letters is community solidarity. He's basically is trying to talk about how do you keep you guys together, because you coming from all over the place, and they had their own issues, as we know, stuff they were doing, stuff that was culturally appropriate in one culture that they were trying to build a new culture, so they weren't able to do that. It's a great example, even though we're 2,000 years removed from that setting, just to look at the Apostle Paul's approach to when you have this really diverse community. And there weren't options right here. So there wasn't like, I'm going to go to the Second Corinthian Church of God in Christ. This is the community, and it was one, right? So we usually define community solidarity as people who have a common goal, a common identity, commiseration, and a common mission. Um, there's a different definition that I actually like, that came from um, what's her name? Kathleen O'Hara, and it is. She does a lot of work on sort of trauma informed understandings of particularly Old Testament stuff. But this is going to be sort of the last discussion. Then I'm going to ram a whole bunch of things toward you. But a better understanding of solidarity is communal promising, communal vulnerability, communal memory, and communal vision. But the people you just say, well, talk about what that means. What does that look like if you were to have a group that had communal promising, so together that sharing the same promises, vulnerability toward one another, memory, sort of a common memory, and a common vision? What would that look like? Yes, both. Discuss amongst yourselves. Yeah, discuss amongst yourselves. When you look at these definitions, communal promising, vulnerability, memory, and vision, what does that actually look like practically? In a church. It actually wouldn't have to be a church if there's a community or house church or but what does that look like? You have to talk to each other. Yeah. Discuss it in your group. One more minute. All right. So, can someone give me an example of what they think if you had a community that practiced communal promising, what that would look like? And it could be very brief. Just what do you think that would look like? Yep. Perfect, perfect, perfect. So, oftentimes in multicultural circles, we talk about tolerating. Like, okay, we got some people, and this week we're going to do we're going to have some black songs, and then next week we're going to do some CCM stuff, and then the week after that we're going to we put up with each other. This is saying, no, I'm for you. I'm completely for you. Okay, so that was excellent. All right, vulnerability, communal vulnerability. What does that mean? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, I like that. All right. Any other thoughts on vulnerability? Okay. Yeah. I think the co-learning is huge. I would use the word uh, corporate and cultural humility. That if I'm going to someone who is culturally different, I don't automatically think I know anything about that. I don't suppose they're supposed to act this way. What they want, don't want. That the way I do it is better, or the way that I don't make any of those judgments. I come in with a vulnerability and a humility to say, "Hey, I'm for you." Like I said, but there's a lot I don't understand. Uh, let's talk, as Milo was talking about. We really have to talk to each other. Okay, communal memory. What do you think that means?
Give an example, but not um, 10 years ago, I personally experienced loss that the congregation that I was part of also experienced. I had an opportunity to go to a different place, but I would have gone somewhere that didn't remember, that did not
Yeah.
have a color, like a, and even people now that come into the space that weren't there because of the proximity, they're still out almost like this collective.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. It's very, very good. Um, so it's actually the collective understanding of experiences, but also a collective understanding of history. Sometimes what makes a place unsafe for others is because you go into a place that completely denies your history or what happened to you. And it just makes it so that you never quite get that. So it is understanding what has happened in the past and an accurate rendering of it. Okay. So many times I've seen so many well-intentioned congregation who continually just gaslight what somebody who's been through something comes to the table and say, yeah, but it really wasn't that bad. It sort of was, you know. So
Just to say that sometimes one of the ways in which has come into my mind wars and things like that. One way that obliterate that collective memory. So they
mhm.
would take the artwork, they would demolish the churches, the culturally relevant things
Yes,
that
yes.
they recall collectively as
I,
a nation and just demolish them.
yeah, and as Pastor Orlando is talking, I don't know how many of you have read any of the Native American boarding school and just that history and experience. And there are people living today who went to boarding schools. This is not like this was something, and just the amount of devastation of what they call cultural genocide. That we have whole languages that are lost forever because of that. So, uh,
To a lot of crisis is often the when there is out of those that kind of
yeah, yep,
and if we miss that opportunity, then
absolutely. Thank you. And then the vision is a little easier. It's sort of a communally discerned, going back to who gets to actually make the vision, communally discerned preferred vision. So asking actually the congregation to be involved in what goes forward is sometimes because we have professionalized our churches, where we have sort of professional staff and then sort of laity. We expect the professionals to be able to do that, when really, in order to have solidarity, it's got to be a communal. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, and we're going to get to that, but suffice it to say that all the literature says either the pastor goes uh, or people in the church begin to lead. But it there's going to be somebody. Yeah, someone's going to go, no matter what. So I'm going to be reading from the First Nations version of uh, 1 Corinthians 9, 19 through 23. And I like the version because it really talks a little bit more about the relationships of the community. And this is Paul's words. It says, "For even though I am free and a slave to no man, I made myself a slave to all in order to win many more. When I am among my own tribal members, like them, I honor our traditions, that I might win them over to the good story. To the ones who are under the law, I come under the law when among them, even though I am no longer under our tribal law. I do this to gain their respect and win them over to the good story. When I am among the ones that are outside our tribal law, I consider myself also outside our tribal law. Even so, I am not truly outside Creator's law, but the law of the chosen one. I do this to gain their respect and win them over to the good story. When I'm among those who are poor and weak, I join with them in their struggle. I look for common ground with everyone so that I can tell them the good story that will make them whole and set them free. I do all this so that I can tell everyone the good story, so that together we may share in its blessings. And I want you to notice the language of I join their struggle, that we're in the good story together, that we share the blessings, which is a little different than we usually see it, where I do this just to win them over and to sort of dominate, which is sort of an us and them, as opposed to this is us. So Dr. Edwards had talked about in her book, The Strange Pioneers, why diverse congregations are so much more difficult. And she said multiracial congregations are costlier to pursue, less durable and stable than more racially homogenous congregations. People of color endure most of the costs of participating in multiracial congregations, and pastors of color who head these organizations face additional challenges because of their race. Given the tremendous pull of homophily and the reality of racial segregation in the American religious landscape, it is altogether reasonable to ask why anyone, particularly a person of color, would want to pay the significant cost of leading multiracial congregations. And so, um, you know, throughout the book, she ends up talking about how but it's sobering to understand the costs that occur to that. And that's exactly what Paul was trying to talk to the folks in Corinth, to say, this is costly, this is hard work. This is not going to be just, hey, a couple quick fixes. This is a whole process. I like to use the word intercultural to talk about a truly multi-ethnic, multicultural, socially diverse. It is a term that I took from Grace Ji-sun Kim and her work on, she's got a couple books on intercultural theology and other things. But interculturality is the presence of multiple cultures interacting to produce a new reality without diminishing the value of individual collective identities. So it is saying, yes, if you think about the idea of being Creole, right? Anybody here Creole? Okay. So Creole is a combination, a very unique combination of African cultures, Caribbean cultures, French cultures, and American Southern cultures that all come together to make a unique language. It makes a very unique, I mean, like a way of life, foods, the whole bit. It's a complete separate culture, and you can't say that if you just took away the Frenchness, it would be Creole, because it wouldn't be. Or if you just took away the Africanness, it'd be still be Creole. It's not. Each one of them is equally valued um, in producing this new reality. And what you're trying to do if you're developing an intercultural church is saying, yeah, we've got all these things, and we're not diminishing anybody's culture or what they bring to the table, right? But what we are saying is we're taking all that we are and we're coming together to produce a new reality that glorifies God. And that's a little bit different. So when we talk about leadership, we're talking about influencing communities toward missional solidarity in a way that develops intercultural communities. So
Ask a
yeah,
question about
yeah,
that intercultural church
yes.
for a second. So, in a church setting, I mean, beautiful. It makes a lot of sense. Um, Churches like become static things that don't change well or easily or quickly. I know you know this, right? Um, how does that play out in terms of
Yeah.
interculturalness? You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Yeah.
What's really interesting is it used to be, if we were to look at sort of the church health literature in the 1960s, they would talk about neighborhood, and that's, again, we get the birth of all the community churches, but the neighborhoods would be stable for 50 to 60 years. So you would get sort of these big movements where you're trying to get to the community. They were sort of static for a while. When you start to see a side, you'd have time to sort of readjust what you're doing. Well, we know that since uh, the literature in 2010 really suggests every 7 years, your community is changing in a significant way. So it's important not to make your intercultural expression and to codify it, right? And to say, this is what we are, because I guarantee you 5 years from now, you're going to get an influx of something that you weren't even aware of. And if the goal is to continually say, we don't care who our neighbors are, we're going to love our neighbors, and we're gonna come at it with a cultural humility, with a welcoming spirit. And I don't know what we're gonna look like in 10 years, but the whole idea is that we're still saying every time we bring in a new culture, we're loving what that brings, and it changes that new reality, and unashamedly. So Dr. Edwards wrote in her definition of a racially diverse, a successful racially diverse religious space. This is the first day with the new lips or something. Sorry about that. Which I call intercultural churches. She defined it as one that is structurally and culturally equitable, just community of mutuality that has decentered whiteness and white supremacy. And that is because in the United States, again, um, the issue of whiteness and white supremacy is the structural conduit in which our culture most often lives. So this would not fly if we were trying to do this in Malawi, where we just were uh, last month. So the scripture that I shared with you before, which I'm calling the sort of the intercultural leadership key, it says, "I look for common ground with everyone, so that I can tell them the good story that will make them whole and set them free." Dr. Shaniqua, it should be Walker Barnes. There, I have Barnes Walker, but wrote a definition of beloved community that I love. And this is the goal of what we're trying to form. And it has liberated people in transformed relationships, creating a new reality that glorifies God. And that's what we're trying to do. So, anybody here a Star Trek person? All right. So, Star Trek. Do you recognize this episode? All right. So, Darmok Shaka, when the walls fell. Okay. All right. So, anybody would care to give just a 30-second synopsis of what happened in this episode of Star Trek?
They land on this planet that is kind of communication that they don't really understand the communication. Captain Picard ends up
the translators are functioning. It's not a cohesive language.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of a better term, punchline of their language is rooted in story, not so you don't have like a cohesive sentence. You refer to a shared.
Yes.
It's exclusively.
Yes. Yes. So basically, these people only talk in things that they have shared or common experiences with.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, that was that really was.
We gotta give credit to Richard Middleton for that because he taught us that in seminary.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating because what ends up happening is for these people to make the crew of Star Trek understand them, they basically sort of kidnapped him and forced him to help them fight one of their enemies. And then they had a common experience. And then they were able to communicate. And I'm not asking that you kidnap your neighbors or any of that, but I'm saying that your ability to actually develop uh, an intercultural reality has a lot to do with proximity and sharing life together. That if you don't have some communal experiences, if you don't really share life, if you don't know their story, if they don't know your story, if you don't talk about their history, then you can never get this far. And I work alongside with mosaics, and I've had so many churches that we're talking to. They say, "Oh yeah, we're a great multicultural, multi-ethnic, socially diverse church." But what you find out is they have a Spanish-speaking service that meets in the gym over here, and then they have usually like a Chinese-speaking group that meets over here, and then they have the regular Anglo group that usually has an ethnic worship pastor. And they'll say, this is how we're doing. And it's not that no one is really doing life together. We're just sort of all in the same place. Okay. So I'm going to go forward a little bit here. So we found in our work, there was 5 different leadership capacities. Okay. One is the understanding of your language for social identification. How do you define who you are? How do we find who others are? How do we, and how we use that language? Okay. Secondly, was cultural intelligence, the ability to function in culturally distinct cultures. Okay. The third one, trauma informed pastoral care. People are hurting, and you need to know how to address that. So many times, people are so wounded, and sometimes because we're ill equipped or because we don't recognize that they've been wounded, that oftentimes people will say that church or whatever is just not a safe place because they've been really wounded. You have to understand that. The fourth thing is intersectionality, the understanding of power dynamics within your culture and in the culture at large. And then the fifth one was a more expansive theological imagination. Understanding not only the core of your theology, but understanding that different cultures can sometimes look at the same scriptures and using sometimes the similar tools that you have and have a completely different understanding of the application of scripture. And they're not being someone who has a low understanding of scripture or anything. It's just different ways. And we have to have the theological imagination to understand sometimes you can have different understandings right next to each other, and you don't have to worry about there being some kind of compromise. So priorities of intercultural formation then are using and the intentional use of language to promote solidarity and inclusiveness. Prioritizing cultural intelligence as a mean of colonializing the community, meaning that you're trying to take away Yeah, and understand that there's a dominant culture that says this is the best way of doing it. To changing to we're many cultures, and together we're making something new. Developing safe space for the wounded and the marginalized, deconstructing power differentials that are inherent in the greater context, and creating a discipleship pathway that is justice informed, gospel centered, and communally expressed. Okay. Some of the stuff that are obstacles to intercultural community formation include nominal identity. That means sort of like, I, yes, I've always said I'm a member at New Hope, but I don't really know what that means. I don't really participate in anything that we do, but I go there and, nominal identity. Can't really be part of something if you don't really know what you're supposed to be. Secondly, non intimate vertical and horizontal relationships. This is all about relationships, right? So if you're not communing with Jesus, okay, then it's hard to commune with one another. So it is that idea of having continual communion. This is John 15 stuff. Number three, poor proximity with other members. So this is sometimes harder for churches that are in the city. When I first got to New Hope, I was telling Pastor Thomas this. Most of our members live in the suburbs, and they would come into the city, and they were very devoted, but we had no presence in the 5 block radius around where that church was. And when we began to have a presence there, it actually changed things quite a bit in terms of the culture of the church. For program-led organizations that prioritize programs over people, sometimes you have a church, this is what we do, as opposed to let's engage some folks and see what we can do together. All right. 5, low expectations for the community. Okay. I can't tell you how many times we can't do that. No, those people coming that we won't like that. They will know we don't. They won't want to hear this kind of music. All of those are just low expectations. You don't know what people want because you're not in relationship with them. Get in a relationship with them. You might find it enriches your worship services. Anyway, consumer-driven priorities of the community, right? Or that sort of idea is I come to church and you know, Pastor Adrian is not feeding me spiritually. I need more from him. Okay, never considering that they have stuff to add to the community, but it's all just that kind of thing. And then the 7th one, which is just a killer, politically framed identities, using words where conservative or progressive, or we're this or we're that, or we're a group of patriots. Or all those words are just terms of exclusion and inclusion, depending on who's saying them. So the first thing, social identity as an intercultural leadership. What is social identity theory? It's really the process of social formation, right? And it involves first sort of identifying who you are and then talking about the characteristics of that person. So we're children of God, and who are the children of God? Those who have expressed faith in Jesus, right? And then you talk about who's not in the group, who's the out group. Well, for us, everybody else, right? And then there's always comparison. How do you know who's in and who's out? That's social identity theory, right? So look how Paul does this. Paul says, and here he's talking about Galatians. He says, for in Jesus Christ you are all children of God through faith, right? Now he's just talking about in group right there, right? As many of you were baptized into Christ, have clothed yourself with Christ, right? Baptism as the initiation rite to the in group, right? There's no longer a Jew or Greek. There's no longer a slave or free. There's no longer male or female. For all of you are one in Christ. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. Love this, all this inclusive language, right? You're all children of God You're all baptized into Christ. You're all clothed yourself with Christ. You're all Abraham's. You all are heirs to the promise. All of these things that he's talking about. You notice he couldn't say, except, brother Jacob, he's completely jacked up, or just, the people who live on this side of town, they really struggle with this. No, he uses really inclusive language. And I love it's very relational, right? One in Christ, despite all these differences, the ethnic differences, social differences, and gender differences. He's continually focusing on how we're all one, how we're inclusive. Okay. So, social imagination is the combination of social identity with values that forms a narrative or a framework that reinforces both of those. Okay. And that's important because anytime that you start marketing yourself as something, it says something about you. So here's some examples. And we're not going to have time to go into groups, so I just want you to shout out who's in this group and who's not. Okay, you ready? All right. So Heritage Bible Believing Conservative Baptist Church, and their motto is lifting up Jesus from the living word to lead our nation. All right. So who's included in this and who's excluded? Are included or excluded? Okay. What's that? Magas. Okay, so that's in. All right, so Christian nationalists would like this. And what makes you say Christian nationalists? I agree with you, but what in there? Yeah, there you go. That emphasis on the nation there. Okay. All right, so who's out in this? Yeah. So basically anybody who doesn't fit into that categories. Okay. All right, here we go. The Richard Allen African Methodist Episcopal Church, and their motto is continuing the legacy of Richard Allen to follow Jesus and extend the legacy of the historic Black church. Who's in?
Black folks and Richard
Yeah. Right. Right. And people who are familiar or have a desire for the historic Black church. Right.
Yep.
Right. Everybody else, despite the fact that they may say this is exactly who we are, it still sort of says everybody else is excluded. Okay. All right. Here's one of my favorite: the lit church, the church that is always on fire, always fresh, and always feeling free. All right. Who's in this? What's that said again? Okay.
Ironically, the lit church wouldn't have those in the liturgy.
Okay. Yeah, they would not. Well, who's in this? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it would be something. Yeah,
Blowers, trumpet blasters, tambourine.
that's right. And there's sort of an emphasis almost on like the worship service that you just know that you're going to have a good time when you get there, but we'll say okay.
Extra.
All right. And if you're not like the person who's most caught up on sort of the most recent trends, you probably don't want to come to that kind of church. You're like, I don't really. Right.
Are these real? Or
These are combinations of stuff that I've started put together from places. Okay, here's one. The Lion of Judah Fire Baptized Holiness Church of God. Saved, sanctified, fire baptized, and waiting for the return of our Savior. All right, who's welcome there?
those were saved, sanctified, fire baptized.
Yeah. Yeah. So with yeah, and a very so language used quite a bit in charismatic, much more sort of the legalistic understandings of stuff. And anyway, probably not. Although, it's really interesting because yeah. So in the denomination I grew up in, it was very legalistic, but we had women pastors all over the place. Now they did wear stuff that covered from right here all the way down to their ankles, but they were preaching.
Were they given the title pastor?
Yeah, they were pastors and bishops, the whole bit. Yep. All right, last one. Chosen church, led by our anointed leader, Apostle Joshua. We honor God through participation in the prophetic vision of Apostle Joshua, who leads his followers to a life of prosperity that glorifies God.
Anybody Joshua like?
It is a, yeah. So this is a cult. I'm just making sure everybody was aware that it is a cult. But the whole point of it is, even in saying what it does, it is telling you who's in and who's out. Okay. So one of the things that that was shared earlier was this idea of crisis as an opportunity. I find that it's actually an opportunity to either make huge strides or to go backwards. And this is a diagram that is taken from Brenda Salter McNeil's Roadmap to Reconciliation. And what she talks about is there's this catalytic event. So, and that could be anything. It could be something in your local community, or it could be something nationally. George Floyd, right? And in there, there is a crisis moment in which your community has to make a decision. Is it going to try to grow and understand a new reality? Or is it going to double down and sort of say, this is the way we've always understood it, this is how it is, and just double down? Okay? And we find that this moving to here, the understanding the reality, and that understanding that your people are now my people is a really hard jump. Because people tend to want to do this, just preserve who we are. And in particularly in America, when it comes to race things, there's such a fear that you'll be preserved, you'll be seen as racist, or that you'll do something that invokes guilt. That there's a tendency to just try to deny that there's anything, or to re-narrate the whole thing so that it's not just, George Floyd doing that. That's a bad cop. That's a bad cop there. You can say, well, but it's happened like a couple hundred other times that we have documented. So it's like a pattern. No, it's not. It's just some bad cops. Police are so good and everything like that. And it's not like police can't be good, but you still don't have a structural problem. It's not like they can't be, but we end up back here where there's just defensiveness as opposed to doing that. Okay. A lot of times when there is change, diversity. I want you to think of diversity as change. Okay. It modifies the collective identity. It's a fundamental change that is a threat to existing identities. The biggest thing that I want you to take away from this slide is that resistance is best understood as grieving. So sometimes people are not saying, hey, it's not that I don't want Black people in my thing, but then we're not going to sing the hymns that I've grown up with that have blessed me tremendously. If we're going to do that, we're going to have this choir or whatever we're going to have. And I get that. And there's a way that you can walk with people in your congregation and say, yeah, I love those hymns too. You don't have to give up those hymns, but don't you think it's much richer as we walk together and we experience just a fuller way of doing some of the things we do? And just having the compassion, going back to what Pastor Mia said before, it shows that caring to say, yeah, I get, you've been in this church for 25 years. I know that's really, really important. That was a blessing to you. So I'm not just easy going, hey, we're doing next week, we're getting rid of the adult Bible fellowships. We're just going to do this because this helps. No, it's sort of saying, I get it. And before we even do that, I wanted to talk to you about it because I know how important it was to you. And I want you to understand, though, repainting the vision of where we're going so you understand how hard this decision was for us to make as we go forward. And people really appreciate that you took the time to say, I did take that in consideration. I know this was important to you. Yes, sir.
Well, just speak to that real quick and how that's really significant. I feel like I've had some conversation in my own context that I won't fully get into, but where you cast some vision and you share out what seems to be very compelling and gospel centered vision. That's almost like how could anyone disagree with this? And when it's up there, I find that people can be excited at the thought of it there. And then when you say, okay, now let's bring it down. So now it impacts the kind of music that we or like you even have
Yeah.
things where you start to invite people, but we have people who like to sit in their seats. So if you invite people and now someone is sitting in the seat that I sit in, then that's so it's you get people to agree here, but when the rubber meets the road,
That's right.
That's when you start to meet some distance.
That's right. And that is why, again, it comes back to relational things. And that's why it's actually easier to make those changes in a small to medium sized church than it is with a really big church, because you don't have that kind of relationship. But in the churches that are at least medium sized, you have that enough of a relationship so that when you start seeing that friction, you can go to that person and say, hey, I see you know, it doesn't look like you're really enjoying change. And they say, yeah, because, you know, I really didn't like that we did this. And you say, I am so sorry. And, you know, and maybe we can do a little bit of that, you know, or something possible to do. But I just want you to know that I'm really sorry that bothered you. I just wanted to reaffirm why we're going in this direction. And I think sometimes just the fact that you took the time out to say, we're going. Now, sometimes people say, I don't care. I want my hymns, right? And you say, that's not what we're doing. I'm so sorry that that's bothered you. And there comes a point, and I don't want to say it this way, but there comes a point where, particularly when you've been with people, you've nurtured them, where you have to say, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I'm saying, like, so if you know this is the vision where you're going, and you've talked about it, and it's been affirmed by your leadership, right? Everybody's doing this, and it's years now, and you still have that person who says, I still want to have Sunday school. And you just say, hey, you know what? You know, we've discussed this, not having Sunday school, but, you know, so-and-so Free Methodist Church across has a wonderful Sunday school. And, you know, I would really recommend you go. It's just not worth getting into that. So, all right. So I got to run real quick here. All right. So the second thing was cultural intelligence. And cultural intelligence is actually a tool made by David Livermore. And you can actually get certification in the CQ. Both Amelia and I are certified to do this. Cultural intelligence is broken up in 4 components. One is cultural intelligence drive, which is your interest and your motivation to adapt to multicultural environments. Some people just don't want to. Okay. And if you don't want to, no matter how much information you have, you're just not gonna. All right. So cultural intelligence first is drive. Secondly is knowledge, and that's just understanding about different cultures. Third is strategy, your ability to plan, meaning that if I know that I'm going to be talking to a Swahili speaking group of pastors, how do I prepare for that to sort of facilitate things? And then lastly, action, your ability to adapt when relating and working out interculturally. Okay. And so I'm going to go forward here. So cultural intelligence guards against one, just developing an assimilation process. It is so common to have a group, let's say, of someone who uh, immigrates into your community, and you begin an earnest thing to minister among them, and all of a sudden you're sort of teaching them all the things to do stuff in your culture, as opposed to partnering with them to understand how you can develop this new thing. Appropriation. Appropriation is basically using cultural symbols and customs of a minority group that commodifies to endorse the dominant culture. Okay, what does that mean? That means, hey, we have a completely Anglo service. but we got a black worship leader, and he does like Kurt Franklin type stuff, right? And everybody just say, "Oh, that is wonderful," and he just does that, and we go, "He said, now we got a multicultural worship. That's what we have." All right, come on, don't act like you guys haven't seen that. Come on now.
So is appropriation then always to endorse the dominant culture?
Right. You're still saying we're doing the same stuff, but we just picked some music, or we
Yeah.
did some, or and we haven't really changed what we do.
Sure.
And then colonializing, showing non-dominant cultures the right way due to misguided and often racist concepts of exceptionalism. And so, I won't even get into that one, but it happens a lot. Okay. Trauma-informed pastoral counseling was the third one. And I love the term Han, that is a Korean term that expresses suffering that we experience due to sin. The best definition was from Dr. Andrew Park, one of my professors at United Seminary. And he says, Han is the rupture of the soul caused by abuse, exploitation, disrespect, neglect, injustice, and violence. And so we find that when people experience wounding, or they experience the effects of Han, that it isolates us, it embitters us. We know that neurophysically it changes who we are, that it disenchants, disillusions, and discourages us, and it enrages us. One of the things that always it was really funny to me, particularly in the 2020 Black Lives Matter thing, is people would ask me, and legitimately, they'd say, "Why are people mad? Why are you so angry all the time? Why are you mad?" And you're like, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been going on, and people have tried to say it in ways that, and it's never received. So now you got people who are really angry, and so you get that effect all the time. So sometimes you'll get somebody who walks in your church and they just look angry, and sometimes the best way to go about it is not to presume, just find out what's going on. Now, sometimes they can just be a really mad, angry dude, but I'm just saying, sometimes there's more to it. Traumatic wounding is when a person's vulnerabilities exceed their internal and external resource for support and stabilization. And so, all of these different things that happen when people are wounded. The road to healing is what we call resilience. Resilience is to preserve and maintain a positive sense of self when faced with traumatic wounding. All right. So this is really important in communities to make yourself a safe community. So first of all, wounded people, when they come into the community, they need healing. All right. They need to hear the whole gospel. Gospel isn't just to keep you from going to hell and going to heaven, but it is that entire thing of becoming whole, becoming exactly what Jesus had called you to be, and more like Jesus, right? The gift of the Holy Spirit, not just the forgiveness of sins, but the attaining of true and abundant life, right? That's that whole gospel, right? They need to be placed in a place of safety. So you have somebody who tells you that their husband is abusing them, right? So the thing is not to argue whether the husband's abusing them or not. All right. The point is to get them, and if there's any children, to safety. You can deal with the other stuff before. If you've ever heard Dr. Gerhardt's other uh, uh, presentations, she gives some really good stuff on that. And she has a book called Cross and Gendercide, which is great on that. And then the last one is the community itself is a place where healing occurs. The community takes it upon themselves. So not just, hey, we're going to send you someplace, but they say, here's a place, a safe place we're going to love on. All right. Racial trauma or racialized trauma. Just so you see, there's a couple different things, and I'm gonna try to do this last in like 2 minutes, very fast. All right. So different types of racial trauma. There's historical trauma, shared by a group spanning multiple generations, carrying trauma related to symptoms despite not being present for the past traumatizing events. So sometimes people will say to African Americans, that happened, 70 years ago. So, in a very personal application of this, I found out that my maternal grandfather was always a very mean and twisted guy, which I found out more as my mother just told me all the stuff that he did, and I never understood him. And by the way, he was an elder in the Church of Christ too. But I'm on Ancestry.com, and if you're on Ancestry.com, they just send you continually stories like of people. I ended up finding out that my great grandfather, his father, ends up killing himself. He was sort of the town drunk, and he kills himself by going over a viaduct in the biggest street in the town that I was in, and jumping off the viaduct head on to a train. And it was very public, and it was head of the news, and all of that kind of stuff. And you begin to realize how jacked up my grandfather's life was, and then the trauma that he experienced then. So it all makes sense. But just to say, sometimes generational stuff happens that you're not even aware of. Transgenerational, personal, vicarious, microaggressions, gaslighting, all those things add to the trauma. Okay. And as we talked about the church as a solution to racial trauma, part of it begins with a communal memory that mandates factual and accurate telling of the truth. Okay. And so then this intersectionality. Yeah, I'll keep there. Intersectionality was the fourth thing, and that's just understanding the different power structures. The best way to say this is mutuality. You want to be at a place where you're not going by whatever society tells you. Hey, I'm a person of privilege. You're a person of disadvantage. But in the church, right, we're in a congregation where we're trying to develop where everybody feels like they have equal worth, dignity, contribution toward the missional solidarity that we're trying to do. Okay. The third one is just expanding our theological. Our fifth one was expanding our theological imagination. And I say this, that God's agenda is always more expansive than yours. I don't care who you are. I have been to church after church where they tell me, yeah, God has called me, I'm going to minister right here, and other people, and we're growing and we're doing great, and I'm praise the Lord. And sometimes you'll go like, but this is huge population of people right here. You know it? Nope, don't know anybody over there. Have you decided any way of engaging there? Nope, don't need that at all. We have a church in a small town in East Texas. And that is a town of 5,000, in which 60% of them are African American. Our church there, our Free Methodist church there, though, is all white, has no African American members. And we went and visited, wonderful people, got a chance to talk to them. When we asked a question, hey, have you ever done any ministry with any of the African American folks? And the answer was, why? And you're like, well, just because it's like the town. Yeah, right. But the understanding is, well, my job is, sort of minister to the people that here. They've got their own churches. Again, so even the language there is othering, right? They're there and we're here. When God's agenda is understanding literally your community is your parish. And that God is constantly working behind the scenes, right? We believe in prevenient grace, right? God is always working with people who you don't even think would even be connected to you, right? I'm going to end with this quote that I heard a pastor say that is really important for those who are struggling to say, we don't even know how to minister to people who either we don't speak the language or we don't do anything. But it says, every ministry moment is preceded by a montage of miracles. Every ministry moment is preceded by a montage of miracles, meaning that God is already working in your community to make it so that people who you don't even know are open and willing to come to what you're doing. The goal is for you and your community to make that effort and make yourself somebody else's Rehoboth. All right, I'm going to end right there.